Hi, my name is Talia. Welcome to Talia Nerds Out. If you watched my last video, which you may or may not have, actually I'm not sure when this video will go up. I'll probably post this pretty soon after I put it up, pretty soon after I record it, simply because even though I have other reviews that need to be posted, this kind of ties into the other video a little bit that I just finished recording. So this might get precedence over other videos that probably actually should get precedence. Anyway, this is a review of Helen Hunt's The Duchess of Bloomsbury Street. This is a sequel to, and I should have kept this out, I don't know why I didn't, a book that I actually have given to my mom because I'm waiting for a different cover, one with a different cover to come in, and she's enjoying it so far. She's reading it for the first time. But it's a sequel to 84 Charing Cross Road. This is the cover of my old book. This is the cover that I have coming in. But the first book I do have a review on, I believe, on this channel at some point. This was a book that was recommended. Actually, I think it's one of my more highly... I don't remember. I feel like I reviewed this book. I'll be shocked if I didn't. But this was recommended through the Tristan Reads the Classics channel. I believe that's what it's called. I'll try to remember to tag his channel below. Not that he needs my help. He's a huge channel. Well, very well deservedly so. He talks about some very interesting books, and I discovered this book through something that he was recommending. I think he was recommending for like cozy reads, and I read this then, and I was told by people who watched that video that, oh, you should really read the sequel, which is The Duchess of Bloomsbury Street. I immediately picked it up, but I kind of put it aside for a later date for when I would feel like I needed it. And as I mentioned in the last video that I recorded, I've been in a bit of a reading slump. The first book that I read to try to get me out of the reading slump was Lilies of the Field, and I have a review up for that that I recently posted. But I then also decided, because of finishing this journal spread that I just showed you, that, oh yeah, I remember I have The Duchess of Bloomsbury Street. 84 Charing Cross Road was a really easy, quick, enjoyable read. Maybe I should go ahead and pick up The Duchess of Bloomsbury and finally read it. Maybe now is the time. And it was a great time to be reading this. I started it on September 9th and I finished it on September 10th. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. It's whereas the 84 Charing Cross Road book, which was written, let's see, it was set over a 20-year period, if I remember correctly. This book is supposed to be 20 years, I think, after the first book starts, I think is what it is. That book is a bunch of letters between Helen Hunt and the guy who buys the books at this small used bookstore, in England. And that's their correspondence, and it's just a really cool, heartwarming, but also interesting historically correspondence. Because this is set, I think it's a little after World War II, when that book starts. Now, this book was published in 1969, 1970. Okay, 1973. But I believe her trip actually took place a couple years before that. It might have been 1960, 1970. Okay, 1971 is when everything is taking place within the book. Versus, instead of being a bunch of letters, this is a bunch of diary entries. Because with the proceeds from the 84 Charing Cross Road book, she was finally able to realize her dream of actually going to England. So friends kind of pitched in so she could have some money. The proceeds of the book helped. And she just finally said, I'm gonna do it. You know, I've been talking to these people for 20 years. It's time to give it a shot. Even though, you know, I'm nervous even traveling by myself in certain areas in New York, I'm gonna do it. And she goes And it's really, oh, she was told when she went, keep a diary of everything. You're going to want to remember this. And she does. And she was really glad that she was given this advice. And as am I, and I think quite a few people who have read this book are glad that she took that advice. Because the way Helene Hanff looks at the world and reports on things that happened to her is amusing and can be insightful. And just, it's a really enjoyable read. She does a great job of characterizing not only the people that she meets while she's there, but also England itself at that time period. She just gives you a nice flavor of the city of London and a couple of other places that she visits, and then the kind of people who welcome her and kind of take her in and help her along as a stranger in this country that she's never visited before. They take her to see all these different sites, but they also take her into their hearts and really they make her feel at home. They make her feel, well, like the Duchess of Bloomsbury, and Bloomsbury's right where her hotel is. And so she's constantly getting letters, invitations to eat places, and she's really made to feel like she's a big deal and like people want to spend time with her, which has been a great experience for her while she was there. I think she ended up staying, let's see, she arrived, I want to say she stayed a month, maybe two. So she landed in June, and her last entry is in July. So but when in July? Hold on. So July 17th, and then, June 17th. And she leaves July 26th. She didn't intend to stay nearly that long, but people would take her out to dinner so she could stretch her money a little bit farther. She managed to provide the Reader's Digest who would kind of help fund her trip because they were the ones who, I guess, helped her put out the book, maybe. But the proceeds from them had helped her with being able to go to London. So she had submitted, at their request, some of the fan letters from British fans, and that got her more money so she could stay a little bit longer. So she never, like, from one day to the next, she never knew how long she'd actually be able to stay. So she savored every moment that she was there and appreciated every moment that she was there. And along with her, the reader gets to see London through the eyes, see London through the eyes of someone who's just appreciating every moment. And so we get to appreciate every moment. And it's just an uplifting read. The people that she meets there are just really enjoyable companions for the time period that you're reading the book. And you kind of feel like you'll miss them when you leave, when the book ends. But for us, we can always reopen the book and revisit. And you wonder if, like, how hard it must have been for Helene to settle back into her life. It's so different. If it must have felt, and I think she even says at the end, it felt almost like a dream that had passed, because it's so completely different than her life that she was returning to in New York. But yeah, I found this, it's described as a delightful travelogue. And yeah, it did make me want to check out a couple of her other books. I think she has one called Q's Legacy, which is I don't know exactly who Q is. It's someone apparently who his writings really inspired her to go and read other great works. And that's what started her really in her love of books. And another book that she wrote about New York to kind of like address some of the fears that people in England had expressed about New York, where they visited but never left their hotel room because they were so scared. And she wanted them to see the good parts of New York as she knew it as a local at that time. So I'm going to be reading her book. I think it's called The Apple of The Apple of My Eye, I think is what it's called. Because I enjoy her writing style. I enjoy the way she goes through the world and interacts with the world, with the people around her, but also just with, the way she moves through things, the way she observes things, the way she takes things in and kind of examines them, absorbs them. Just, she looks at the world in a way that's just really fun and interesting. She's a great person to visit London with, to visit New York with, to just watch, to read her letters. She's a fun person to read. But I had to laugh because Mom and I earlier this year had attempted to and ended up putting aside a book by Cardinal John Henry Newman, who I believe he was just declared fairly recently a doctor of the church in the Catholic Church, which is a big deal. I can't remember exactly how many of them there are now, but it's not a ton. It's a really big deal if you're named a doctor of the church, and he did get fairly recently. I want to say a few months ago. Actually, about the time that, not long after Pope Leo came on. That was one of the early things that he did. But anyway, she talks about Newman here, and she said, Q, the guy I was telling you about, also introduced me to John Henry Newman, who taught at Oriel, Oxford, and when I finished with Trinity, I'm going over to Oriel and sit in John Henry's chapel and tell him I still don't know what he was talking about most of the time, but I've got whole pages of the Apologia by heart, and I own a first edition of The Idea of a University. And I had to laugh because that's exactly what I felt like sometimes when I was reading John Henry Newman. I still don't know what he was talking about most of the time. John Henry Newman is someone you have to take in snippets and kind of absorb and catch the gist and read over and over again, because you can't just get him the first time around, at least not, well, I can't anyway. But I sat there and I read that and I was like, relatable. Except for the memorizing thing, because I can't memorize worth anything. But yeah, I found this book to be incredibly fun. What else did I mark in here? Oh, just some things about the differences in spelling versus pronunciation, like where things are spelled differently but still said the same, like curb with a K in England versus curb with a C in the US, things like that, or some of the difference of figures of speech that she had noticed. Oh, I liked this quote. First of all, let me check what this other one was. Oh, no, that was the John Henry Newman one. Okay. So someone asked her why Americans liked, I actually don't know this, Gray's Elegy. I guess it's a poem. So Elegy is a poem by a poet called Gray. And I don't really know who that is. I'm not a big poetry person. But she was asked why Americans are so fond of this particular poet and this particular poem. And because I guess it would have a lot of Americans wanting to see his grave. And she knew her mother had been fond of it, but she hadn't really ever had quite a connection. But she tried to explain, and she tried to explain that we went to school and studied English poetry, and the poets we read all celebrated the aristocracy, kings and queens, and Sidney Sisters Pembroke's mother, and the spires of Oxford and the playing fields of Eton, except Gray. Gray celebrated the mute, inglorious nobodies. And since all Americans are descended from mute, inglorious nobodies, I suppose he strikes a chord with us. And that was just kind of like something she, spitballed at the top of her head. She kind of hoped she was right. But then it dawned on her, because she couldn't understand at first the British love of Dickens when she was much more fond of Shakespeare. And she just couldn't get it, but she learned pretty quickly like it was almost heresy to say you didn't like Dickens. And then she says here, after she talks about the poet Gray, I began to wonder whether in explaining the American affection for Gray, I stumbled on a clue to the English passion for Dickens. They may admire Shakespeare more, but it's Dickens they love. Maybe the average Englishman, being neither king nor peasant, identified less with the kings and peasants of Shakespeare than with the lower and middle class upper mobility types in Dickens. So I thought that was a really cool insight. And the book is full, besides with the personalities and the funny anecdotes, it's full of sometimes these little insightful observations that she has, like why Dickens is important to people, what he offers that kind of touches people, which I really enjoyed that insight. But yeah, if you've never read The Duchess of Bloomsbury Street, or if you've never read 84 Charing Cross Road, read them. But read 84 Charing Cross Road first. You will get more out of The Duchess of Bloomsbury if you read the other first. And actually, they even say this in the introduction. So do make sure that you do that, just so you can get the best experience out of this book. Thank you very much for joining me for this book review. Hope that you have a very blessed day, and I will see you the next time. God bless. Bye.